I grew up in upstate New York and then went to some of the schools that you all went to. And I never imagined I would be running for president. I was certainly not some crazy kid being like, I'm going to be president one day. So if any of you are thinking that, like, you're more advanced than I was. Like, I was playing video games and just doing whatever Asian kids do in upstate New York. So now that I'm running for president, like, I've learned more about the Asian American place in society. And one thing that scares the heck out of me is that this country is heading towards becoming majority minority by 2045. That's 27 years from now. And so there's a very happy notion in some quarters that the country will just become more tolerant as it gets more diverse. You just figure that math will take care of it, because if you have enough people, everyone will just have to get along. Unfortunately, that is not really the way things play out if you look at historical examples. There are very, very few examples in human history of a dominant racial or ethnic group giving up its dominance over time. That actually is not normal. That's not normal behavior. And so if you look at what's happening right now in this country, you can see an increasingly insecure white majority becoming more and more hostile, truly. And who is going to be the boogeyman of the next 10 to 20 years? Who's going to be the great rival to the United States in the eyes of American society? China, that's right. And so what do you think the attitude is going to be over time for the shrinking, insecure white majority that's losing their jobs for, let's say, Chinese Americans or Asian Americans? I personally said to a group at Harvard, I think we're one generation away from falling into the same camps as the Jews who were attacked in a synagogue in Pittsburgh, like just a couple months ago. It's like we're probably one generation away from Americans shooting up a bunch of Asians saying, like, you know, damn the Chinese, because there's a giant Cold War or even more with China. That is the great danger that I fear that my children are going to grow up in. I have two young boys, 6 and 3. They're American, I'm American. And Asian Americans historically have not been highly politically active or energized. Asian Americans vote at lower levels, they donate at lower levels. And because of this, the dominant political parties do not care about Asian Americans. They do not regard us as a very important constituency at all. They regard us as a low-level ATM, where they'll show up, take some pictures because we love pictures, get some money, leave, and then not have to care about it for quite some time. That is our place in American politics right now. And this is partially because of where we live. Where do we live? We live in, like, New York and California and places where, frankly, our votes are not going to tip anything. And there aren't so many of us. I'll tell you guys, if Asian Americans all lived in Iowa, we would be a very important voting bloc indeed. You know, because I'm going to Iowa next week for the 7th time, because in order to become president of the United States, you need to win Iowa. But everyone knows that Asian Americans, by the time you get to New York, like, the votes don't matter, and we don't vote, we don't participate. And there's a notion that we don't lead, you know, that we're not leaders. So that is what I've discovered over this time. And this was not my initial purpose in running for president, but we need to change that very, very quickly. Because if we sit back and think, hey, America will stay stable and organized and reward hard work, and we'll make money and, like, have a good time and not have to care about what happens outside of our doors, that attitude is going to stop working pretty quickly. Probably next 5 to 10 years, unfortunately. So we need to start getting very, very engaged and active and show the rest of the country that we can solve problems. We have our own vision. We have our own leadership. And so some of the things that I talk about when I talk to Asian American groups, some people find the fact that I'm running for president to be, you know, a little bit audacious or something like out of the natural order, let's say. And part of it is that, well, you know, I haven't been a senator or a governor or some other elected official. But I have many friends who back John Chung for governor of California. And one thing I suggest to Asian Americans, and I'm going to suggest to you all tonight, if we wait for it to be our turn, it will never be our turn. There is never going to be a point when someone looks over and says, oh, it's time for that Asian American senator, or governor to run for president and be president. That's not the way this works at all. Like, we will never get there. The only way that we're going to actually have a seat at that leadership table, or in this case, on the debate stages of the Democratic primaries next May, the only way we get there is if we step up and say, we have a vision for this country, and it is just as powerful, just as important as anyone else's vision. Only way we get there. Number two is that we've been gifted a massive opportunity politically in this next cycle. So I just finished saying that the parties do not care about Asian American voters, because they generally do not. But in this cycle, California moved its primary vote up by a bit more than a month. And so this time, California votes fifth. The first state is Iowa. The second state is New Hampshire. The third state is Nevada. The fourth state is South Carolina. And then this time, the fifth state is California. So you're going to have a lot of people running for president as a Democrat, probably 20 to 25, including me. And it is not going to be resolved by the time they get to California. So this time, the way Asian Americans vote might actually determine who the president of the United States is. First time in decades, first time certainly that I can remember. So this is an opportunity for us to stand up and say what we think actually matters this time. And the third thing, and maybe the most important thing to many of you, how many of you are parents? I sense there's at least some parents in the room. Now, this is a little uncomfortable, but how many of you have the sense that Asian Americans are allowed to become this successful in the US, but we are not allowed to become this successful? There are at least some of you who believe that. I mean, there's a real message you get that that's the case. And I have been with the leaders of this country. I've been with President Obama and President Clinton and President Bush and a dozen senators and governors. And one of the things you learn when you spend time with them is that they are certainly no better than we are. I guarantee you guys that. That we are every bit as smart, certainly every bit as hardworking, every bit as innovative, every bit as patriotic, and every bit as loving as any other American. And that is what I'm going to demonstrate on the path to the presidency in 2021. Well, that's when you get sworn in. You win in 2020, then you get sworn in 2021. And one joke I like to tell for Asian Americans is that we're going to make the White House the Gold House. So thank you all very, very much. Would love to take some questions, but feel really glad to be here with people who are definitely exceptionally politically engaged in this community. So thank you all very much.